behind the grand palace walls and endless royal protocols, there exists a truth that rarely makes headlines. Even future kings and queens crave the simple warmth of family gatherings. When the weight of the crown feels heaviest, when public scrutiny reaches its peak, and when the world watches every move, sometimes the greatest luxury isn't a diamond tiara or a golden carriage, it's the laughter of loved ones around a dinner table, the comfort of familiar faces, and the freedom to simply be human. As another year draws to its close and a new one beckons with fresh promises, Catherine and William find themselves at a crossroads between duty and desire, between the expectations of a nation and the yearnings of their hearts. What happens when two of the world's most watched individuals decide to prioritize family over formality? What secrets unfold when royal masks are set aside, and what magic emerges when tradition meets genuine human connection? This is not just a story about royalty, it's about the universal need for belonging, the courage to choose love over obligation, and the extraordinary power of ordinary moments that can transform everything. Prepare to witness a New Year's celebration that will challenge everything you thought you knew about royal life, and discover how sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply choosing to come home. The grandfather clock in Kensington Palace struck 11, its deep chimes echoing through the corridor where Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood gazing out at the London skyline. December 30th had arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the entire city was holding its breath before the final celebration of the year. Through the frost-kissed windows, she could see the distant lights of homes where families were gathering, preparing for New Year's Eve in their own intimate ways. William emerged from his study, loosening his tie after a particularly challenging day of meetings with palace officials. The weight of recent months showed in the slight furrow of his brow, the way his shoulders carried tension that seemed to have become a permanent fixture. He found Catherine in her contemplative pose and approached quietly, understanding without words that she was wrestling with something significant. "The children are finally asleep," he said softly, joining her at the window. "George insisted on staying up to practice his New Year's resolution speech. Charlotte made me promise we'd have chocolate cake tomorrow, and Louis." He paused, smiling despite his exhaustion. "Louis asked if the Queen of England gets to stay up past midnight." Catherine turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the palace lights. "And what did you tell him about the Queen of England's bedtime?" "That even queens need their beauty sleep, but perhaps this queen might make an exception for New Year's Eve." William studied her face, noting the thoughtful expression that had been present for weeks. "What's troubling you, Catherine? You've had that look since the palace released our official New Year's schedule." She sighed, leaning against the window frame. "I keep thinking about Christmas morning. Do you remember how George's face lit up when he opened that simple wooden train set from your grandmother? Not the expensive electronic toys or the designer clothes, but that handmade train that reminded him of the one at my parents' house. He spent 3 hours playing with it, completely absorbed, completely himself." William nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. He wasn't Prince George in that moment. He was just a little boy playing with trains. "Exactly." Catherine moved away from the window, her voice gaining strength. "And I keep thinking about last New Year's Eve. The formal dinner, the carefully orchestrated guest list, the speeches that felt more like performances than celebrations. Everyone was so focused on protocol and appearances that we forgot to actually celebrate. I watched you that night, William, and I could see you counting the minutes until it was over." The truth of her words hung between them. William ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that had become increasingly frequent during moments of internal conflict. "The palace staff has already confirmed the arrangements. The formal reception, the midnight toast with the diplomatic corps, the traditional photographs. But what if we didn't?" Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper, but the revolutionary nature of her suggestion filled the room. "What if we chose something different this year?" William stared at her, processing the implications. "Catherine, you're talking about abandoning years of tradition. The palace has expectations, the press has been notified of our schedule, security arrangements have been made. I'm talking about choosing our family over formality, William. Just once." Catherine moved closer to him, her eyes bright with conviction. "My mother called today. She mentioned how quiet Bucklebury will be this New Year's Eve, how she and Dad will probably just watch the fireworks on television and share a quiet bottle of champagne. Pippa and James are traveling, Mike and Zara have their own plans. It will just be my parents, sitting in the living room where we used to play board games and argue over who got the last piece of Christmas pudding. William felt something shift inside him as she spoke. Your parents' living room, he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. Remember our first Christmas there, before we were married? How your grandmother insisted you experience a normal family Christmas at least once. You helped my father with the crossword, played charades with Pippa, and fell asleep on the sofa while the children watched cartoons. You told me later it was the most relaxed you'd felt in years. The memory brought a genuine smile to William's face. Your mother made me wear that ridiculous Christmas jumper with the reindeer. And you loved every moment of it. Catherine reached for his hands. The children barely remember last New Year's Eve because it was so formal, so adult, so removed from their world. But they still talk about Christmas morning at Granny and Grandpa Middleton's, about feeding the chickens and helping Grandpa with his garden projects. William looked toward the children's wing of the palace, where their three little ones slept peacefully, unaware that their parents were contemplating a decision that would send shockwaves through the royal establishment. The security implications alone would give the protection officers nightmares. But, it's possible? Catherine pressed gently. If we really wanted to do this, it's possible? William was quiet for a long moment, weighing decades of ingrained protocol against the yearning he felt for genuine connection. It would mean disappointing a lot of people who have worked very hard to arrange our official celebrations. And it would mean giving our children memories of their parents choosing joy over duty, just once. Catherine's voice held no judgment, only hope. I'm not suggesting we abandon our responsibilities permanently, William. But, this one night, this one celebration, what if we gave ourselves permission to be human? The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. William thought of the formal receiving line they were scheduled to participate in, the carefully rehearsed small talk with dignitaries, the midnight toast that would be photographed and analyzed by press around the world. Then, he imagined George, Charlotte, and Louis running through the Middletons' garden, their laughter echoing off the old oak trees while Catherine's parents watched with the kind of uncomplicated joy that had become so rare in their lives. We'd need to convince the security team that Bucklebury is manageable, he said slowly. And we'd have to have a conversation with your parents about what this would mean for them. Catherine's face lit up with cautious excitement. Are you seriously considering this? I'm seriously terrified by how much I want this, William admitted. When did we become so removed from the things that actually matter? When did protocol become more important than presence? The moment we said I do in Westminster Abbey, Catherine replied with gentle honesty. But that doesn't mean we can't find our way back to ourselves occasionally. William pulled out his phone and stared at it for a moment before setting it aside. If we're going to do this, we can't half commit. It means having some very difficult conversations tomorrow morning. The private secretaries, the security detail, the palace press office. And my parents, Catherine added. They'll need to understand that agreeing to this means their quiet New Year's Eve becomes anything but quiet. Do you think they'll agree? Catherine smiled, thinking of her mother's reaction to their early courtship, how Carol Middleton had never been intimidated by royal protocol when it came to her daughter's happiness. I think my mother would agree to host a circus if it meant having her grandchildren close for New Year's Eve. My father might need some convincing about the security arrangements, but, yes, I think they'll say yes. William moved to the window where Catherine had been standing earlier, looking out at the city lights. The children would be beside themselves with excitement. George would probably plan activities for weeks in advance. Charlotte would insist on helping Granny Middleton with all the cooking preparations. And Louis. Catherine paused, grinning. Louis would probably try to convince Grandpa Middleton to let him drive the tractor. The image of their youngest son, barely 3 years old, seriously negotiating tractor privileges with Michael Middleton brought the first genuine laughter either of them had shared in weeks. In that laughter, William found his answer. Let's do it, he said, turning back to her with determination replacing hesitation. Let's give our children a New Year's Eve they'll remember forever, and give ourselves permission to remember what joy feels like. Catherine threw her arms around him, and, for a moment, they were simply a married couple who had just made a spontaneous decision about holiday plans. The weight of their titles and responsibilities would return soon enough, but, in this moment, they were simply William and Catherine, choosing love and laughter over duty and decorum. "Tomorrow is going to be interesting," William murmured against her hair. "Tomorrow is going to be terrifying," Catherine corrected. "But, tonight, we're parents who just decided to give their children the most wonderful New Year's gift imaginable." As they stood together in the quiet palace corridor, neither could have predicted the chain of events their decision would set in motion, or how a simple desire for family connection would transform not only their New Year's celebration but their entire perspective on what it truly means to live a meaningful life while carrying the weight of a crown. The clock struck midnight, marking the beginning of December 31st, and, with it, the last day of a year that had tested them in countless ways. But, as they finally headed to bed, both carried the rare gift of anticipation for what tomorrow would bring, knowing that sometimes the most courageous act is choosing to prioritize the people you love over the expectations of the world. Dawn broke over Kensington Palace with an unusual energy, as if the building itself sensed the momentous conversations about to unfold within its walls. Catherine woke before her alarm, her mind immediately racing through the careful choreography required to transform their spontaneous decision into reality. Beside her, William was already awake, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man who had committed to jumping off a cliff and was now calculating the distance to the ground. "Second thoughts?" Catherine asked softly, studying his profile in the early morning light. "Hundreds of them," William admitted, turning to face her. "But also a strange sense of excitement I haven't felt in months." "Is that normal?" "Nothing about what we're planning is normal," Catherine replied with a smile that held both nervousness and determination. "That's rather the point." They dressed quietly, knowing that within hours, their usual morning routine would be interrupted by conversations that would challenge decades of royal protocol. William chose his most approachable suit, the navy one that Catherine had always said made him look less like a future king and more like someone you might encounter at a village pub. Catherine selected a simple cashmere sweater and pearls, understanding instinctively that today required approachability rather than formality. The first challenge came at breakfast, where their private secretary, James Harrison, arrived with the day's schedule and immediately sensed that something significant was about to unfold. A man who had served the royal family for 15 years, James possessed an almost supernatural ability to detect when routine was about to be abandoned. "Good morning, Your Royal Highnesses," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "I have the final confirmations for tomorrow evening's New Year's reception, and the guest list has been approved by all relevant departments." William and Catherine exchanged a glance that communicated volumes. They had rehearsed this moment during their brief conversation over tea, but the reality felt far more daunting than their preparation. "James," William began, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care, "we need to discuss some changes to tomorrow's arrangements." The phrase "some changes" in royal vernacular could mean anything from a slight adjustment in timing to a complete revolution of established protocol. James's expression remained professionally neutral while his mind began calculating potential complications. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. What modifications did you have in mind?" Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice warm but firm. "We've decided to spend New Year's Eve with my family in Bucklebury. All of tomorrow's official engagements will need to be cancelled or postponed." The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of the mantelpiece clock seemed to echo through the room like a countdown. James's pen hovered over his notepad as his brain processed the implications of what he'd just heard. "I beg your pardon," he said carefully, "but did you say cancelled?" The formal reception, the midnight toast with the diplomatic corps, the traditional photographs, William confirmed, his voice gaining strength with each word. "All of it. We're choosing to celebrate New Year's Eve as a private family gathering." James set down his pen entirely, a gesture that in his world represented the verbal equivalent of a fire alarm. "Your Royal Highnesses, I'm afraid I need to understand the scope of what you're suggesting. The New Year's reception has been a royal tradition for over a century. Invitations have been sent to 43 diplomatic missions, the Archbishop of Canterbury has confirmed his attendance, and the palace catering staff has been preparing for weeks." "We understand the implications, James," Catherine said gently. "We're not making this decision lightly. With respect, ma'am, I'm not certain you do understand the full implications. James's professionalism was beginning to show cracks of genuine alarm. The security arrangements alone for an unplanned visit to Bucklebury would require at least 72 hours of preparation. The protection officers would need to conduct site surveys, coordinate with local police, establish secure communication protocols. Then, we'd better start those conversations immediately, William interjected. Because this is happening, James. The question isn't whether we can make it work, but how quickly we can make it work well. James looked between them, recognizing the particular combination of determination and nervous energy that indicated a decision had moved beyond discussion into implementation. After 15 years of service, he knew when to argue and when to adapt. Very well, he said, retrieving his pen with the air of a general preparing for an impossible military campaign. I'll need to contact the head of security immediately. Chief Inspector Morrison will want to speak with you both within the hour. And I'll need to reach out to Mr. and Mrs. Middleton to discuss their willingness to accommodate this arrangement. Actually, Catherine interjected, we'd prefer to have that conversation with my parents ourselves. This morning. James nodded, making rapid notes. The guest cancellations will need to be handled delicately. We can't simply state that you've chosen a family gathering over diplomatic protocol without causing significant offense. Perhaps an urgent family matter requiring your immediate presence? No, William said firmly. No fabricated emergencies or diplomatic illnesses. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. The cancellation should simply state that the Prince and Princess of Wales will be spending New Year's Eve in a private family celebration. Sir, James said slowly, that level of directness will generate significant media interest. And questions about why you've chosen to abandon traditional protocol. Let it generate questions, Catherine replied. Perhaps it's time people saw that even future monarchs value family connections over formal obligations. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Inspector Morrison, whose presence had been requested with unusual urgency. A woman whose calm competence had earned her the respect of both the royal family and her security team, Sarah Morrison entered the room with the alert expression of someone expecting to address a significant security concern. Your Royal Highnesses, she began, I understand there's been a change to tomorrow's schedule that requires immediate security assessment. William gestured for her to sit, recognizing that the next few minutes would determine whether their plan remained a hopeful possibility or became an impossible dream. Sarah, we want to spend New Year's Eve at Bucklebury with the Middleton family. We need to know if that's something you can make secure on short notice. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but Catherine caught the slight widening of her eyes that suggested she was rapidly calculating logistics that normally required weeks of planning. Sir, an unplanned relocation for New Year's Eve presents several significant challenges. Bucklebury lacks the established security infrastructure of your usual residences. We'd need to coordinate with Thames Valley Police, establish secure perimeters, brief additional protection officers. But, it's possible? Catherine pressed. Sarah was quiet for a moment, her mind working through protocols and contingencies. The Middleton residence has been secured for previous visits, so we have existing site assessments. The challenge is the compressed timeline and the significance of New Year's Eve from a security perspective. It's one of the highest profile nights of the year. What would you need to make it work? William asked. Minimum 24 additional protection officers, coordination with local police for perimeter security, establishment of a secure communications center, advance team deployment within 6 hours, and complete cooperation from Mr. and Mrs. Middleton regarding temporary modifications to their property. Sarah paused. And, frankly, sir, a great deal of luck that nothing unexpected develops. Can you arrange all of that? Sarah looked at both of them, noting the unusual combination of nervousness and excitement in their expressions. After 12 years of protecting the royal family, she had learned to distinguish between casual whims and deeply felt decisions. Yes, sir. It won't be easy, and it won't be standard protocol, but, yes. I can make it secure. The relief that flooded through William was almost physical. Thank you, Sarah. I know this is far from ideal. Sir, if I may speak candidly? When William nodded, Sarah continued. In my experience, the security arrangements that matter most are the ones that protect not just your physical safety, but your ability to live meaningful lives. If spending New Year's Eve with your children's grandparents serves that goal, then it's my job to make it possible. After Sarah departed to begin the complex logistics of relocating royal security operations, William and Catherine found themselves alone with James, who was staring at his notepad with the expression of a man calculating diplomatic catastrophe. The phone calls are going to be challenging, he said finally. 43 diplomatic missions, the Archbishop, the palace catering staff who have been preparing for weeks. We'll make personal calls to the most important guests, Catherine offered. The ambassadors and senior officials. They deserve to hear directly from us. And the press statement? James asked. William considered the question carefully. Something simple. The Prince and Princess of Wales will be celebrating New Year's Eve with family in a private gathering. They send their warmest wishes for the coming year to all those who had planned to join them for the traditional reception. That's it? James looked somewhat stunned. No elaborate explanation or diplomatic language? That's it, William confirmed. Sometimes the truth is the most radical choice available. As James gathered his materials and prepared to begin what he would later describe as the most challenging day of his professional career, William and Catherine sat together in the sudden quiet of their breakfast room. The magnitude of what they had just set in motion was beginning to sink in. Are we completely mad? Catherine asked, voicing the question that had been lurking beneath their confidence. Probably, William replied. But I keep thinking about George's question last night about whether the Queen gets to stay up past midnight. What kind of childhood are we giving them if they think royalty means missing out on normal family celebrations? And what kind of message are we sending about what actually matters in life? William reached for her hand. That family comes first. That joy is worth fighting for. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose to be present with the people you love. Outside, London was beginning its final day of the year with typical December grey skies and the busy energy of a city preparing to celebrate. Inside Kensington Palace, a revolution was quietly beginning, one that would challenge the relationship between duty and happiness, tradition and authenticity, public service and private joy. Neither William nor Catherine could have predicted that their simple desire for a family New Year's celebration would spark conversations throughout the royal household about the balance between obligation and fulfillment. But, as they prepared to call the Middletons and explain their extraordinary request, both carried the rare feeling of having made a decision that honored their truest selves. The hardest conversations of the day still lay ahead, but the foundation had been established. By evening, they would either be preparing for their most meaningful New Year's celebration in years, or dealing with the consequences of a beautiful plan that had proven impossible to implement. Either way, they had chosen courage over caution, and that choice would define everything that followed. The drive to Bucklebury had never felt longer, despite taking the same route Catherine had traveled countless times throughout her life. William gripped the steering wheel with unusual tension while Catherine rehearsed various versions of the conversation they were about to have with her parents. Behind them, their protection detail followed at a discreet distance, already implementing the preliminary security protocols that Chief Inspector Morrison had hastily arranged. What if they say no? Catherine asked suddenly, voicing the fear that had been growing throughout their morning of frantic phone calls and diplomatic cancellations. Then, we'll have learned something important about the difference between what we want and what's actually possible, William replied, though his own anxiety was evident in the way he checked and rechecked the rearview mirror. They had left the children at Kensington Palace with their nanny, deciding that this particular conversation required adult focus and honesty. George had bombarded them with questions about why Mummy and Daddy were visiting Granny and Grandpa Middleton without them, while Charlotte had insisted on sending a drawing of flowers for Granny's refrigerator. Louis had simply asked if they would bring back biscuits, his priorities remaining refreshingly uncomplicated. Bucklebury appeared through the winter afternoon light exactly as Catherine remembered from childhood, the village green dusted with frost and the familiar cottages wearing their seasonal decorations with understated English charm. As they turned into her parents' drive, Catherine spotted her mother through the kitchen window, apparently baking something that required her complete concentration. "She's making bread," Catherine observed with a smile. "She always bakes when she's nervous or excited." The question is which emotion we're dealing with today. William parked beside Michael Middleton's well-used Land Rover, noting how the ordinariness of the scene contrasted sharply with the extraordinary nature of their request. Through the windows of Anmer Hall, they could see the warm glow of afternoon light illuminating the living room where Catherine's childhood had unfolded in comfortable normalcy. Carol Middleton opened the front door before they had reached it, her face bright with the surprised pleasure that always accompanied unexpected visits from her daughter and son-in-law. She wore the practical cashmere cardigan and sensible shoes that constituted her daily uniform, her graying hair pulled back in the effortless style that had remained unchanged for decades. "Catherine! William! What a lovely surprise," she said, embracing them both warmly. "I wasn't expecting you until after the new year." "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Mom," Catherine assured her, accepting the familiar comfort of her mother's hug. "But we need to talk to you and Dad about something rather important." Michael appeared from his study, still wearing the reading glasses that suggested they had interrupted his afternoon perusal of gardening catalogs or village newsletters. His greeting was characteristically warm but measured, the result of years of experience with his daughter's increasingly complicated life. "William, good to see you," he said, shaking his son-in-law's hand with genuine affection. "You both look like you have something significant on your minds." They gathered in the sitting room where Catherine had spent countless hours of her childhood, the space unchanged except for the addition of photographs documenting her journey from village girl to Princess of Wales. The afternoon light streaming through familiar windows created an atmosphere of timeless comfort that immediately began to ease the tension William had been carrying. "We need to ask you something that's going to sound rather mad," Catherine began, accepting the cup of tea her mother had automatically prepared. "And we need you to know that you can say no without any worry about disappointing us." Carol and Michael exchanged the look of parents who had learned to expect the unexpected where their eldest daughter was concerned. After years of navigating royal protocol and public scrutiny, they had developed an unusual capacity for remaining calm in the face of surprising requests. "What's on your minds?" Michael asked, settling into his favorite armchair with the patient expression of a man prepared to listen carefully. William took a deep breath, recognizing that the next few minutes would determine whether their spontaneous decision became reality or remained a beautiful impossibility. "We've decided we want to spend New Year's Eve here, with you, as a family. All of us. Catherine and me and the children." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of Carol's teacup settling into its saucer with unusual care. Michael removed his reading glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Catherine recognized as his method of buying time to process unexpected information. "You want to spend New Year's Eve here," Carol repeated slowly, "instead of your usual royal celebrations?" "We've cancelled everything," Catherine confirmed. "The formal reception, the diplomatic dinner, all the traditional obligations. We want the children to experience New Year's Eve as a family celebration, not a state occasion. And we want to remember what it feels like to celebrate something simply because it brings us joy," William added, "not because it's expected or traditional or diplomatically important." Michael leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Catherine, this is a significant departure from protocol. What prompted this decision?" Catherine smiled, recognizing her father's approach to complex situations, understand the reasoning before addressing the logistics. "Do you remember Christmas morning when George played with that wooden train for hours? He was completely absorbed, completely himself. I realized we'd been so focused on giving our children royal experiences that we've forgotten to give them normal childhood memories. And I realized," William continued, "that I couldn't remember the last time I celebrated anything without thinking about how it would be perceived, analyzed, or photographed. I want one night where we can just be a family enjoying each other's company." Carol set down her teacup and studied both of them carefully. "What would this mean practically? Security, preparations, disruption to the village?" "Significant security presence," William admitted honestly. "Chief Inspector Morrison is already coordinating with local police. There would be protection officers, secure communications equipment, temporary modifications to your property. your quiet New Year's Eve would become anything but quiet.
And the media attention? Michael asked.
I imagine the press would be quite interested in this departure from tradition. Probably intense, Catherine acknowledged. We've issued a simple statement about choosing to celebrate privately with family, but that will likely generate significant speculation. Carol stood and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where her grandchildren had played during previous visits.
The children would be here for New Year's Eve? All three of them?
If you agree, yes. George is already planning activities he wants to do with Grandpa, Charlotte wants to help you cook something special, and Louis.
Catherine paused with a grin. Louis wants to know if Grandpa will let him drive the tractor.
Michael laughed despite the seriousness of the conversation.
That boy has excellent priorities.
But what about you both?
William asked.
This is your home, your peace, your private space.
Are we being unfair asking you to share that with royal security and media attention?
Carol turned from the window, her expression warm with the particular joy that grandparents experience when contemplating time with their grandchildren.
William, when Catherine was small, she used to insist on staying up until midnight on New Year's Eve.
She would fall asleep on this very sofa around 11, and Mike would carry her to bed while I cleaned up the celebration debris. I always imagined that someday I might have grandchildren who would fall asleep on that same sofa after their own New Year's celebration.
Michael nodded slowly.
The security complications, the media attention, the disruption to our routine, none of that matters if it means our grandchildren get to experience a proper family New Year's Eve.
Are you certain? Catherine asked, though she could see the answer in her parents' faces.
Because once we confirm this, there's no changing our minds without creating significant complications.
Catherine, her mother said gently, do you remember what I told you when you were first dating William and worried about whether our family was suitable for royal connections? Catherine smiled, remembering.
You said that love creates its own protocol.
Exactly.
And this decision, this choice to prioritize family connection over formal obligation, this is love creating its own protocol. Carol moved to embrace both Catherine and William. Of course you'll spend New Year's Eve here.
It would be an honor.
Though I do have some practical questions, Michael added with characteristic attention to detail.
How many security officers are we talking about? Will they need accommodation? What about catering? Should we plan for a larger celebration or maintain our usual simple approach?
William felt a profound sense of relief washing over him. The security team will manage their own accommodation and catering. As for the celebration, we were hoping for exactly what you would normally do, just with more participants. Champagne at midnight, party games in the evening, comfort food throughout the day, Carol said, mentally adjusting her preparations. Though I suppose I'll need to increase quantities somewhat.
And, perhaps child-proof the celebration a bit more than usual, Michael added. 3 royal grandchildren require different preparations than 2 adults with a quiet bottle of wine.
Catherine felt tears pricking her eyes as she watched her parents seamlessly adapt their plans to accommodate what most people would consider an impossible request.
You realize this means your peaceful retirement Sunday will include protection officers in your garden and, probably photographers at your front gate?
And it also means George building snowmen with his grandfather, Charlotte helping her grandmother prepare a feast, and Louis charming everyone within a 5-mile radius, Carol replied. I think we can manage the inconvenience in exchange for those memories.
William stood and extended his hand to Michael. Thank you. Both of you. I know this is asking a great deal. Michael shook his hand firmly.
William, you're asking us to spend one of the most important celebrations of the year with our daughter and her family.
In what universe is that asking too much?
As they prepared to return to London to finalize arrangements and collect the children, Catherine lingered in the sitting room where she had spent countless hours dreaming about her future. Now, watching her parents discuss sleeping arrangements and menu adjustments for a royal New Year's celebration, she marveled at how life had managed to circle back to the simple truth that the best celebrations happen when love is the primary ingredient.
Second thoughts? William asked quietly, finding her in contemplation.
The opposite, Catherine replied. I'm thinking about how this might be the most important decision we've made as parents. Not just because it will give the children wonderful memories, but because it demonstrates that we believe family connection is worth disrupting tradition. And because it proves that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is choose what makes you genuinely happy over what's expected of you. Outside, the afternoon was surrendering to early winter evening, and soon they would need to return to the complex logistics of transforming their spontaneous decision into secure reality. But, for now, they sat in the comfortable chaos of a family home where love had always taken precedence over formality, where children's laughter mattered more than perfect protocol, and where the most important traditions were the ones created by people who chose to prioritize each other's happiness. Tomorrow night, 3 young royals would experience their first Middleton family New Year's Eve, complete with homemade snacks, silly games, and grandparents who valued their joy over their titles. It would be a celebration that honored both their royal heritage and their essential humanity, proving that sometimes the most meaningful revolutions happen quietly, in sitting rooms where love creates its own perfect protocol. New Year's Eve morning arrived at Kensington Palace with an energy unlike any the royal residents had experienced in years. Rather than the usual careful preparation for formal events, the corridors buzzed with the organized chaos of a family preparing for an adventure. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been told the previous evening about their extraordinary destination for New Year's celebrations, and their excitement had created a ripple effect throughout the entire household staff. Catherine found herself in the unusual position of packing for a royal celebration that would require no formal wear, no ceremonial jewelry, and no carefully coordinated outfits designed for public appearances. Instead, she folded comfortable sweaters, practical shoes, and the kind of clothing designed for playing in gardens and sitting by fireplaces. The freedom of choosing warmth over elegance felt revolutionary. Mummy, Charlotte appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit and wearing an expression of serious concentration. Should I pack my princess dress for New Year's Eve? Because Granny Middleton might want to see it, but you said we're going to play games and help cook, and princess dresses aren't very good for cooking. Catherine smiled at her daughter's practical assessment. What do you think would be better for helping Granny with cooking and playing games with your brothers? Charlotte considered this carefully. My purple jumper and my comfortable trousers. And my sparkly shoes for midnight, because New Year's Eve should have some sparkles, shouldn't it? That sounds absolutely perfect, Catherine agreed, marveling at how her 4-year-old daughter had instinctively understood the balance between celebration and practicality. In the adjoining room, George was conducting a serious inventory of activities he planned to pursue at his grandparents' house. His list, written in careful 6-year-old handwriting, included help Grandpa in the garden, learn to make bread with Granny, teach Louis to play proper card games, and stay awake until midnight to see the new year arrive properly. Dad, George appeared at William's side as he packed his own simple wardrobe. Will there be other children at Granny and Grandpa's for New Year's Eve? Because usually at our celebrations there are other children, but they're always wearing very fancy clothes and they can't really play properly. William paused in his packing, struck by his son's observation. No, George, it will just be our family and your grandparents. Why do you ask? Because that means we can play real games instead of polite games, and if I spill something on my clothes, Granny will just help me clean up instead of everyone looking worried about photographs. George's matter-of-fact analysis of royal event dynamics showed a sophistication that sometimes surprised his parents. Would you prefer that kind of celebration? William asked gently. George nodded vigorously. I like the fancy parties sometimes, but I like it better when I can just be myself without worrying about being perfect all the time. Is that okay? William knelt to his son's level, understanding that this conversation represented something important in his eldest child's development. George, being yourself is always okay. In fact, it's the most important thing you can be. Even when I'm going to be king someday? Especially when you're going to be king someday. The best leaders are people who know how to be genuinely themselves while also caring deeply about others. Meanwhile, throughout the Middleton household in Bucklebury, preparations were underway that reflected both the excitement and the complexity of hosting a royal New Year's celebration on 12 hours' notice. Carol Middleton had risen before dawn, her mind racing through menus and logistics with the efficiency of a woman who had spent decades managing family celebrations. Mike, she called to her husband, who was examining the garden through the kitchen window with the expression of a man calculating security implications. Do you think we should prepare the upstairs guest room for the children, or would they prefer the sitting room where they can spread out their activities? Michael turned from his assessment of how protection officers might position themselves around his greenhouse. Given the choice between properly made beds and the freedom to build pillow fortresses, I think our grandchildren would choose the sitting room. Besides, Charlotte mentioned wanting to help with cooking preparations, and the kitchen is much more accessible from the main living area. And Louis will want to be wherever there's the most activity, Carol agreed.
That boy has never met a quiet moment he couldn't improve with additional chaos.
The morning brought Chief Inspector Morrison to the Middletons' front door for a final security assessment, her professional demeanor softening somewhat as she observed the obvious love and care that had gone into preparing for the royal family's arrival. Unlike the formal palaces and official residences she typically secured, this home radiated the kind of genuine warmth that made her job simultaneously more challenging and more meaningful. Mrs. Middleton, Sarah began, I know this is disruptive to your normal routine, and I want you to understand what today will look like from a security perspective.
Carol set down her mixing bowl and gave Sarah her complete attention. Please, tell me what we need to know.
We'll have a discreet perimeter around the property, but we've worked with local police to ensure it doesn't interfere with your neighbors' activities. Inside the house, we'll have 2 officers positioned unobtrusively in areas where they can maintain sight lines without intruding on your family time. Our communications center will be set up in your garage, if that's acceptable.
Whatever you need, Michael assured her.
Our only concern is that the children feel comfortable and free to be themselves.
Sarah smiled, recognizing the genuine priority behind his words.
Sir, I've been protecting the royal family for 12 years, and I can tell you that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis are never more secure than when they're surrounded by people who love them unconditionally. Your home provides that kind of security in ways that formal protocol never can.
Back at Kensington Palace, the final preparations were creating an atmosphere of barely contained excitement.
Louis, the youngest at just 3 years old, had appointed himself the supervisor of suitcase packing, offering commentary on each item selected by his parents and siblings. Daddy, you forgot your comfortable jumper, he observed seriously, watching William close his small overnight bag. I don't think I'll need a comfortable jumper for one night, Louis. But Granny Middleton's house is very cozy, and cozy houses need comfortable jumpers. Also, Grandpa might want to show you his garden, and gardens are cold in winter. William reopened his bag and added the navy cashmere sweater that Catherine had given him last Christmas, marveling at his youngest son's instinctive understanding of what their celebration would require. The phone calls from James Harrison throughout the morning painted a picture of palace staff managing the diplomatic aftermath of their unprecedented decision. The cancelled New Year's reception had indeed generated significant interest from both media and diplomatic circles, but the initial response had been more curious than critical. Sir, James reported during his 11 o'clock update, the French ambassador expressed her disappointment but also her understanding.
She mentioned that she hoped your family celebration would be restorative.
The Archbishop of Canterbury sent his warm wishes for a meaningful new year with your children. And, somewhat surprisingly, 3 other diplomatic families have inquired about hosting similar family-centered celebrations next year. William felt an unexpected sense of relief at this news.
So we're not causing international incidents? On the contrary, sir.
It appears that your decision to prioritize family time has resonated with people who also struggle to balance public obligations with personal relationships. The initial media response has been largely positive, with several commentators noting that this choice demonstrates modern royal values. As afternoon approached and departure time neared, the children's excitement reached fever pitch. Charlotte had prepared a small bag of gifts for her grandparents, including a hand-drawn card that depicted their family celebrating under a shower of colorful confetti. George had written a list of questions he wanted to ask Grandpa Middleton about agriculture and local wildlife. Louis had simply packed his favorite toy cars and his most comfortable pajamas, his priorities remaining refreshingly uncomplicated.
Are you ready for this? William asked Catherine as they conducted a final check of their preparations.
I keep thinking about all the formal New Year's celebrations we've attended, Catherine replied, and how they always left me feeling somehow empty despite all the pomp and circumstance.
Tonight feels different already, and we haven't even left yet. Different how? Authentic. Like we're about to create memories instead of fulfilling obligations.
The drive to Bucklebury became a journey of mounting anticipation. George entertained his siblings with predictions about Granny's dinner menu, Charlotte practiced the song she planned to perform for everyone after dinner, and Louis fell asleep clutching his toy car, exhausted by the excitement of preparation. As they pulled into the familiar drive, Catherine felt a profound sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with returning to her childhood residence and everything to do with choosing authenticity over expectation. The sight of her parents waiting at the front door, their faces bright with anticipation, confirmed that they had made the right choice. "Look," George said suddenly, pointing toward the garden where his grandfather was standing beside a small pile of logs. "Grandpa's got wood for a proper fire.
We're going to have a real celebration."
The scene that greeted them perfectly captured the essence of what they had been seeking: genuine warmth, uncomplicated joy, and the promise of a celebration where love would take precedence over protocol. As protection officers quietly established their positions and the family began the beautiful chaos of arrival, Catherine realized that they weren't just spending New Year's Eve with her parents. They were reclaiming the right to celebrate life simply because it deserved celebration, surrounded by people who loved them for who they were rather than what they represented. In a world where their every public moment was choreographed and analyzed, they had chosen to create space for spontaneity, authenticity, and the kind of joy that could only emerge when people felt free to be completely themselves. The evening that lay ahead would be filled with homemade food, silly games, children's laughter echoing through familiar rooms, and the rare luxury of time that belonged entirely to them. It would be a New Year's celebration that honored both their royal responsibilities and their essential humanity, proving that sometimes the most meaningful traditions are the ones we create in response to our deepest longings for connection and joy.
Evening descended over Bucklebury with the gentle promise of magic that only special nights possess.
Inside the Middleton home, the sounds of family life created a symphony of warmth, children's laughter mixing with adult conversation, the clink of dishes being prepared in the kitchen, and the crackling of the fire that Michael had built specifically for his grandchildren's enjoyment. George had immediately appointed himself as Grandpa's apprentice for all evening activities, following Michael around the house with the serious dedication of a child who had finally found an adult willing to explain the practical mysteries of daily life. Currently, they were engaged in the complex task of setting up the card table for what Michael had promised would be proper games, not the sort where everyone lets you win because you're a prince.
"Grandpa," George said thoughtfully, arranging chairs with careful precision, "do you think being a king will mean I have to let other people win games, or will people let me win because they're afraid to beat a king?"
Michael paused in his arrangement of playing cards, recognizing the genuine concern behind his grandson's question. "George, I think the secret is to play games with people who care more about having fun with you than about who wins or loses. Like family games, where the best part is laughing together, not keeping score."
"Is that why Mummy and Daddy wanted to come here instead of having their fancy party?"
"I think," Michael said carefully, "that your parents wanted to spend New Year's Eve with people who love them just for being themselves, not because they're the Prince and Princess of Wales." In the kitchen, Catherine and her mother were engaged in the comfortable dance of shared cooking that had defined their relationship for decades. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table, carefully decorating biscuits under Granny's supervision while offering a steady stream of commentary about her expectations for the evening. "Mummy," Charlotte announced, applying silver sugar to a star-shaped biscuit with artistic intensity, "I think this is going to be the best New Year's Eve ever because everyone looks happy instead of worried about being polite."
Carol smiled at her granddaughter's observation. "What does worried about being polite look like?"
"When people stand very straight and say how do you do, instead of hello, and when everyone's afraid to laugh too loudly in case it's not proper." Charlotte paused in her decorating to consider her words carefully. "Tonight feels like Christmas morning, when everyone forgets about being careful and just enjoys being together." Catherine felt her heart swell with the confirmation that their unconventional choice had already begun creating the atmosphere they had hoped for.
"Charlotte, what's your favorite part about being here with Granny and Grandpa?"
"That I can help with real cooking instead of just watching, and that if I make a mess, Granny will teach me how to clean it up instead of having someone else do it for me."
Charlotte returned to her biscuit decoration with renewed focus.
And that Louis is allowed to be as excited as he wants without anyone telling him to use his indoor voice. Speaking of Louis, the youngest prince had established himself as the evening's entertainment director, moving through the house with the boundless energy of a child who sensed that normal rules had been temporarily suspended. Currently, he was attempting to teach William the proper way to build a cushion fort, his 3-year-old expertise proving surprisingly sophisticated. "Daddy, this corner needs more support," Louis declared seriously, dragging a pillow twice his size toward their construction project. "Granny said we can use all the cushions we want because this is a celebration, not a sitting room inspection." William, who had spent the day in complex diplomatic conversations about security arrangements and protocol modifications, found himself completely absorbed in the architectural challenges of cushion fort engineering. "You're absolutely right, Louis. What about this corner? Does it meet your quality standards?" Louis examined their work with the critical eye of a master craftsman. "It needs one more cushion and maybe a blanket for the roof. And we should test it by crawling inside to make sure it's properly cozy." As evening deepened into night, the family gathered in the sitting room around the fire that Michael had been tending with the satisfaction of a man who knew his efforts were creating exactly the right atmosphere. The protection officers had positioned themselves so discreetly that the children had forgotten about their presence entirely, allowing the celebration to unfold with natural spontaneity. Right then, Carol announced, emerging from the kitchen with a tray of hot chocolate garnished with homemade marshmallows, "I believe it's time for our traditional New Year's Eve games tournament." George perked up immediately. "What sort of games, Granny?" "The sort where everyone participates and no one worries about winning or losing," she replied with a conspiratorial wink. "Charades, 20 questions, perhaps some card games that Grandpa has been practicing specifically for tonight." The next 2 hours unfolded in a blur of laughter, good-natured competition, and the kind of unguarded joy that had become increasingly rare in William and Catherine's carefully managed lives. George discovered that his grandfather was surprisingly competitive at charades, Charlotte proved to have an unexpected talent for 20 questions, and Louis appointed himself the official timekeeper for all activities, his counting methods creative rather than accurate. William found himself completely absorbed in a heated card game discussion with his father-in-law, their conversation ranging from strategy to village gossip with the ease of two men who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Catherine sat cross-legged on the floor, helping Louis build increasingly elaborate structures with building blocks while Charlotte braided her hair with the focused attention of a professional stylist. "You know what I love about tonight?" Catherine said to her mother during a quiet moment while the men debated the rules of their current card game and the children constructed what appeared to be a castle for toy horses. "What's that, darling?" "No one has checked their phone, no one has mentioned tomorrow's schedule, and no one has worried about whether we're behaving appropriately for our positions. We're just being a family." Carol studied her daughter's face, noting the relaxation in her features that had been absent during recent visits. "Is this what you needed? This kind of celebration?" "I didn't realize how much I needed it until we started planning it," Catherine admitted. "I feel like I remember who I am when I'm not thinking about who I'm supposed to be." As 11 o'clock approached, the children's excitement reached a crescendo. George had been consulting his grandfather's watch every few minutes, determined not to miss the exact moment when the new year arrived. Charlotte had changed into her sparkly shoes as planned, declaring that midnight required proper celebration footwear. Louis had fought off sleepiness through sheer determination, though he was beginning to show signs of the exhaustion that comes from extended excitement. 30 minutes until midnight, Michael announced, checking his watch with the ceremony of a man who understood the significance of the moment. "Should we prepare our midnight feast?" The midnight feast proved to be an assortment of snacks that Carol had prepared throughout the day, miniature sandwiches, fruit arranged in festive patterns, the biscuits that Charlotte had decorated, and a selection of treats designed specifically for small hands and excited appetites. They gathered around the coffee table, creating an impromptu picnic in front of the fire while the clock ticked steadily toward the moment that would mark not just a new year, but a new understanding of what celebration could mean for their family. "Can we make wishes at midnight?" Charlotte asked, perched on the arm of her grandfather's chair with the comfort of a child who knew she was completely welcome exactly where she was. "What sort of wishes?" William asked. "Family wishes. Things we hope for that would make everyone happy." George considered this seriously. I wish for more celebrations like this one, where we can just be ourselves and no one has to worry about cameras or saying the right thing.
Charlotte nodded approvingly.
I wish for more time to learn cooking from Granny and more chances to help Grandpa in his garden. Louis, who had been struggling to stay awake, suddenly perked up with the intensity of a child who had discovered something important. I wish for hugs whenever I want them and for chocolate biscuits and for everyone to be happy like tonight. The simplicity and sincerity of their wishes created a moment of profound quiet among the adults. William reached for Catherine's hand, understanding that their children had articulated something essential about what they had been seeking without realizing it themselves. I think, William said quietly, that all of those wishes are entirely possible to make come true. As the clock struck 5 minutes before midnight, they gathered around the radio to hear the countdown from London. The children pressed close to their parents and grandparents in the comfortable intimacy of people who had spent an evening creating memories together. The protection officers, maintaining their discreet positions, found themselves smiling at the genuine happiness radiating from the family they were sworn to protect. 10 seconds, the radio announcer declared, and George began counting along with serious precision while Charlotte bounced with excitement and Louis clapped his hands in rhythm.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year!
The room erupted in cheers, hugs, and the kind of spontaneous celebration that emerges when people feel completely free to express their joy. Champagne for the adults, sparkling apple cider for the children, and kisses all around created the perfect beginning to a year that would be forever marked by this moment of chosen authenticity. Happy New Year, my love, William whispered to Catherine as they held each other close, their children clustered around them in the firelight. Happy New Year, she replied, understanding that they had created something precious not just for their children, but for themselves, proof that it was possible to honor their responsibilities while also honoring their deepest needs for connection and joy. As the evening wound down with sleepy children curled against their grandparents and adults savoring the lingering warmth of perfect celebration, Catherine realized that they had discovered something revolutionary in its simplicity. They had learned that sometimes the most important thing they could do for their children, their marriage, and themselves was to choose love over duty, presence over protocol, and authentic joy over performative obligation. The new year stretched ahead of them filled with the usual challenges of royal life, public service, and the delicate balance between private desires and public expectations. But now they carried the knowledge that it was possible to create spaces for genuine happiness within the structure of their extraordinary lives. And, in years to come, when George became king, when Charlotte found her own path to purpose, and when Louis discovered his role in the world, they would all remember this New Year's Eve as the night their parents taught them that the most important crown anyone can wear is the one created by people who love you unconditionally, and the most valuable tradition is the one that prioritizes the happiness of the people who matter most. Outside, 2026 had arrived with its infinite possibilities. Inside, a family slept peacefully in the afterglow of a celebration that had honored both their extraordinary circumstances and their essential humanity, proving that sometimes the most profound acts of leadership happen quietly, in sitting rooms where love creates its own perfect protocol.